Serena and Thomas, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for
Absolutely,
having me.
for sure. Now, just to give us a little bit of background as to who you guys are, I'm wondering if you guys can introduce yourselves and let my podcast world know what greatness I'm around here this afternoon. And then we can talk about the Forever Canadian movement.
Serena, you start. Let's start with the greatest.
Wow, I was waiting for you. So, hi, my name is Serena Mah. I'm a public relations and media consultant, and I am the communications lead on Forever Canadian.
Right.
Great. Well, I'm Thomas Lukaszuk. I'm the proponent of the Forever Canadian initiative under the Citizens Initiative Act in Alberta. But in my former life, I was a long time politician in Alberta, Deputy Premier, Cabinet Minister for many years. And now I'm in private sector and, spending most of my time driving all over Alberta collecting signatures on a petition.
Right. And when you were in politics, you were part of the
Progressive
conservative,
conservative government. That's right. I
progressive
started with
conservative.
Ralph Klein and went through 5 premiers. I was elected for nearly 15 years, but progressive conservative.
Yeah. Okay. For sure. Well, yes. Thank you for joining me. And the reason why I reached out to you guys is we've done two other podcasts. We've done one with a writer from the Western Wheel in Okotoks who laid out things very, very clearly, the difficulty that it would be for Canada to leave Canada. And it would be, he didn't want to say it, but basically he was saying it seems like it was almost impossible. And then in another podcast, we talked to the Alberta Prosperity Project. And in my mind, they were very convincing as to why it was maybe a good idea for Alberta to look at separating. But then, when I'm walking my dog, going out to the dog park, when I'm at different functions, I'm always passing these great, wonderful, lovely people sitting at a table looking at, asking people to sign the petition. And inside the petition, you guys are trying to get 300,000 signatures. What's the point of you guys trying to get these 300,000 signatures?
Well, that's the requirement of the Citizens Initiative Act. That in order to have the petition to be valid, it has to gather a minimum of 300,000 valid signatures, which is equivalent to 20% of the electors in the province of Alberta. So it's a formula that has been created by the current government in Alberta, and that's what we have to abide by. But you're right. There are those who feel that Alberta could never separate because it's simply legally or mechanically impossible, and they are not correct. There are mechanisms for Alberta to separate, although they are very onerous. Alberta is somewhat different from Quebec. There's often comparisons between the separatist movement in Quebec and Alberta. But this is the sort of the social studies teacher coming out of me because that's what I used to do. As we all remember from grade 8, Upper and Lower Canada, being Quebec and Ontario, formed Canada. So those are the two originating provinces. They existed as jurisdictions before Canada was Canada, and then Newfoundland joined later, voluntarily as a separate jurisdiction. Well, Alberta and Saskatchewan in 1905 were simply created out of what already was Canada. It was Northwest Territories, and Prime Minister Laurier just decided that it would be better. It was so difficult those days to govern lands that far away from Ottawa. It would be better that some governance was simply transferred to local authorities. And Alberta was created by the Alberta Act, and Saskatchewan was created by the Saskatchewan Act. So they are creatures of Canada. They never joined Canada. So for them to separate, the process is somewhat different than for Quebec. But first of all, a majority of Albertans would have to vote for it in a referendum. And there isn't a clear decision on whether it would be 50% plus one. Most likely, it would have to be a clear majority. So probably somewhere between 60 to 75% of Albertans would have to ask for separation. And then this long constitutional process would begin with negotiating with not only other provinces, because questions would arise: what percentage of national debt, for example, this province of Alberta would take along with it, because you can't just leave all your debts and obligations behind. But most importantly, or equally importantly, negotiations on treaties with First Nations, because those were signed before Canada was Canada, with the Buckingham Palace. And since treaties, the territories transcend the provincial boundaries, how would that issue possibly be resolved? So you're looking at decades. Probably none of us would ever see this come to fruition by way of negotiations in our lifetime. But there is a process, there is a pathway, however difficult it is. But this is all an academic conversation, and a lot of lawyers would make a lot of money debating this back and forth.
Mhm.
But that's not what the real problem is. The real problem is this: just talking about separation, it's creating a massive problem for the province of Alberta, and it has been shown in other jurisdictions from an economic perspective. Business likes a good return on investment, and business likes political stability, predictability. And every jurisdiction, without exception, in the world that ever entertained separation has always suffered economically because business simply packed up and left, and investment dried up. A very good example is the province of Quebec. That's part of the reason why Quebec is a have-not province. There's a good reason why Bank of Montreal has its headquarters in Toronto. During separation talks, they simply packed up and left. Sun Life Insurance, and Montreal was de facto the business capital of Canada before the separation talk began, and most meaningful businesses picked up and left, mostly to Toronto. You see what happened in United Kingdom with Brexit. Most financial institutions left to Munich, Dusseldorf, and other continental European capitals and cities because they simply did not want to take the chance of what it would mean to their investment climate. We're seeing that in the Basque region of Spain as well. Even the Spanish government refuses to invest in the Basque region because not knowing how this will end up. And in Alberta, one of the most prominent business leaders of probably the most emblematic Alberta business being ATCO, ATCO Pipelines, ATCO Trailers. It's one of the biggest Alberta-grown companies. Nancy Southern, the owner and CEO, already indicated that she is feeling investment repercussions in Alberta because of this short-lived discussion about separatism. So, we can debate on whether it is or isn't possible for Alberta to leave, but in the meantime, this will be a futile argument because our economy will take a massive hit.
Well, it's
Aside
the
from the actual,
uncertainty.
sorry, Serena, go ahead.
It's the uncertainty that creates that incredible instability. I have to share the story about my grade 12 son. He said to me, he goes, Mom, how is this all going to work? Like, how are we going to get our medicine? And how is, our hospitals going to work? What about the currency? I mean, a child well, he's not a child, but he's a young man, asking these questions, and a lot of Albertans. And I have to tell you, Carlin, overwhelmingly everyone we stop or stops us actually on the street says the same thing, that they love this country and they can't see one single reason why we would have to separate. In fact, it's not even a hard persuasion. We stand on the street, Thomas and I, we walk down Jasper Ave, which is downtown Edmonton,
Mhm.
the Pride Festival. And literally we stood there and we had people coming up to us, lining up. So there are a lot of people who are supporting this movement to stay in Canada.
Yeah. And that is not a call for status quo. There are issues out there that need to be addressed, but there always have been issues. And you ask not just any Albertan, but you ask any Nova Scotian or any British Columbian, are they perfectly satisfied with the Confederation? Are things perfect? And everyone will tell you they're not. But that's actually the nature of who we are as Canadians. We're a country in continuous negotiation, and there are mechanisms, both through premiers and ministers negotiating, and then there is obviously always the Supreme Court of Canada that weighs in often on issues of inequality and inequity and things of that nature. But that's who we are. But separation ought not to be, one of the leverages that we pull on when we're dissatisfied about one thing or another. In Alberta, there was always this sentiment And it is a small minority of Albertans that felt that Alberta is not getting a fair shake. It goes all the way back to Premier Lougheed, who wanted to freeze out the Eastern bastards because he couldn't build pipelines, and national energy program conversations were then taking place. So the sentiment always existed. What is different now in Alberta is that for a first time, those who have those strong feelings about it, however small of a minority it is, they now feel somewhat empowered because they think that they have a government, or definitely a premier, who somehow is supporting them, and if not supporting them, definitely not opposing them.
Sympathetic.
So this amplifies their messaging right now.
Yeah, and they're very small and loud vocal group is my belief.
So, like, obviously, Danielle Smith's just kind of fallen them, but they're obviously a powerful group. Powerful enough, I guess maybe we'll see what could potentially happen in the next election that happens here. But with Danielle Smith, obviously, she feels that she has some sort of mandate to push this forward.
Well, Danielle Smith has painted herself into a little bit of a corner. And it started actually with Jason Kenney. When Jason Kenney was uniting the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta with the Wild Rose Party, he adopted into his new United Conservative Party that minority of those who have very strong feelings about separatism. Uh, and that, even though in Alberta there are no more than 10% diehard separatists, there is another 10% above that who sort of would entertain that idea but aren't committed to that idea. So maximum 20% within Alberta. In the UCP caucus and in their membership, percentage is significantly higher. So the premier's ability to stay in government would be jeopardized because we believe that there are about 14 members of legislature in her caucus who are sympathetic to the idea of separatism. Well, she doesn't have a 14-seat majority in Alberta legislature. So if this came to a vote, or if this was a issue of confidence in government, she would stand to lose that support, and that would cause her a political demise. So she developed this strange phrase where she says she believes in sovereign Alberta within United Canada. To me, that's a little bit of a word salad. You know, it's really analogous to telling you I am single within the confines of my marriage. It just makes no sense. But by saying that, she's appealing to both sides of her caucus because they both see something in it that they like. So it's a game of semantics, but unfortunately, it's a very dangerous game. This is not an issue that can simply go unnoticed. And as I said earlier, investment markets are looking at this very closely. And at a time when we are living in a very turbulent geopolitical world, where not only our prime minister but other world leaders are trying to develop new markets, new logistics for supply chains, where we are looking for new allies in a military sense. This distraction is something we don't need. And we're noticing that it is being exploited, particularly by President Trump's administration. There is. It's not a coincidence that White House invited separatists from Alberta and met with them on a couple of occasions to discuss what a 51st state would look like. It is no coincidence that President Trump is referring to Canada's 51st state because he sees that there is that division that he can exploit for his political purposes, and we need to shut this down immediately.
And you can
For
see
sure.
that political division, but I got to tell you, when we're out there, it has mobilized a group of Albertans like I've never seen before. So Thomas, as you know, is a former elected member and spent a lot of time at the Alberta legislature. I'm a former journalist, and I've been on many campaigns, and on the other side, as a public relations, also been on many campaigns. I have never seen anything like this. People are lining up to sign the petition. People are lining up to be volunteers volunteer signature collectors and spending some of their precious time over the summer into the fall, going to the dollar store. Our dollar stores are, sold out of Canadian flags and pens,
Hmm.
red, white, everywhere. And I've never seen anything like it. And people are so into it. And when we say a movement, that's an understatement. And I think I spoke with a woman the other day, Judy, who gives me updates every day. 1,200 signatures. This woman is retired and she is a go getter and she's out there. And there's quite a few go getters out there. But regardless of the number of signatures, what I'm telling you that I'm seeing firsthand is a sweeping movement across the province.
Right. Yeah, and as we were chatting about before we started to hit record, I kind of told you where I'm at a little bit. I have a background in oil and gas. I'm a real estate agent now, but when just the way that I feel about Canada, when I see that Canadian flag, like years ago, I get memories on my on Facebook, and we're putting up the Canada flag on July 1st. And, I was proud to be Canadian, but as the years go on, being in oil and gas, just feeling like we're in an abusive relationship with the rest of Canada kind of takes away that pride for me inside of Canada. That whole process, like, I always joke with my wife. I always say, well, I have a vote with her. It just doesn't count. But at the end of the day, that seems like us in Canada here in Alberta, right? We do get to vote in the federal election, but it doesn't really seem to matter how we vote.
Well, of course, it matters. The problem is that, when we have representation by population, and it is somewhat adjusted for the Maritimes, because if it wasn't adjusted, PEI would probably have one half of a member of parliament in Ottawa. So adjustments had to be made historically. But the fact is that Alberta simply doesn't have the population to warrant more MPs, and that is something that I'm actually interested in discussing with our Prime Minister, whether some constitutional changes cannot be made and strengthen our benches both in the House of Commons and in Senate and on the Supreme Court of Canada. But again, this is part of a discussion. This is part of a discussion that has to happen with all the other provinces. A Prime Minister cannot simply add seats in Alberta. No Prime Minister. Harper didn't and couldn't. Trudeau didn't and couldn't, and Carney now won't and can't unless there is the Constitution is opened up for debate, and then all
Hmm.
other provinces will have their own asks on different issues, right? Because that's how these negotiations take place. The oil and gas industry, and I'm very sympathetic towards it, but it's going through a metamorphosis, not only in Canada but worldwide. There is pressure on carbon emissions and carbon taxes, and however much we hate it. This is not a Canadian issue. This is a world issue, and we're simply a player on a world energy stage. And unfortunately, having only one customer, we don't get to dictate how oil is traded worldwide. So that is one issue. Um, but the fact is, if you think that it is difficult today to build a pipeline across Quebec or across British Columbia, try building a pipeline across a foreign country that is not sympathetic to your industry, like British Columbia. Although I'm seeing positive signs both in Quebec and British Columbia right now, they're starting to soften their positions. But if we were a landlocked province, try pushing oil through. How do you think our farmers would get their beef and grain to foreign markets? Because 90% of what we produce is exported. We don't have the population to consume it ourselves. What rail systems, what ports would we be using? And if Canada gave us the access to those amenities, we would be paying fees for it now because it would be a foreign country. What currency? What trade treaties would we be using? Because right now Canada is signatory to all international trade treaties. So Alberta would have to renegotiate them all from scratch. What health agencies would be inspecting our beef and poultry and other products before they get exported? We would have to replicate this entire system in Alberta. What embassies would we be using? What standing would we have in international tribunals on trade? There's a list of questions that would have to be answered. And I simply don't buy the answer that I get from separatists. We first have to separate and then we will figure this out. Well, no, we should be able to figure it out now. And the pathway, again, as I said, is not clear and definitely very costly and very time consuming. And tell me, what leverage would a province of nearly 5 million people that's landlocked, surrounded by two G7 superpowers, being United States and Canada, would have in negotiating treaties worldwide? We would be a speck on a map from an economic perspective. Now, it's interesting that you're in real estate because, that is something that I often think about. If Alberta was to cease being Canada, Canadian federal services would have to be pulled out of Canada and federal workers would have to be accommodated somewhere else. So let's use the military. Imagine if all the military members from Cold Lake, Suffield, and Wainwright were to be relocated to other bases across Canada. That's a few 100,000 civilian and uniformed members that would be selling their houses tomorrow. What would that do to our real estate market when every 15th house on every block would be listed for sale? That's just
Right.
military. And then you have people, Canada Post, and you will see how many there are when they're picketing right now.
Mhm.
And then you will see Parks Canada, and then you will see NAV Canada, and every federal building across the province. All those employees would have to be accommodated in other provinces, or at least given an opportunity. Our real estate market itself would crash virtually overnight. You cannot make emotional decisions and offer simplistic solutions to very complex issues. This not only this talk of separation is causing already harm, but if you take it to this logical conclusion and actually one day we sign and we separate, the benefits by far would be outweighed by the costs associated with it. And the question is, what percentage of national debt would Alberta assume? Since we have nearly 10% of national of I imagine we would land somewhere on 10% of national debt as well. And just setting up the bureaucracy, because we would have to virtually duplicate every service that Canada now offers.
Mhm.
And when you're in government, you sort of see it from a little different perspective because severely normal citizens don't realize how much bureaucracy there is, and we often complain about it, but a lot of it is actually necessary. Yeah, you need people signing international research agreements so our universities can continue to function. You need the student loan system, which is now currently backed by federal government. What would happen to student loans? What would happen to research grants? Alberta universities and post-secondary institutions participate in thousands of international research projects that would immediately stop overnight. Those are things that we don't think about, but those are things that we would have to start thinking about. And sorry if I may add one thing, and we have a little bit of taste of it. If you ever have a chance to go to Lloydminster,
Mhm.
residents will tell you how tough it is to live in a city on a border. We had to create a separate charter for that city to figure out what is Saskatchewan's responsibility and what is Alberta's
Mhm.
responsibility. And that system doesn't work right now. Now imagine creating an entire country within a continent that is surrounded by two separate countries that is landlocked.
Mhm. For sure. So here's a question for you. Do you have right now, do you have hope in what Carney is doing and potentially able to lead Canada to the place that we need to go?
I have hope in Albertans. And I think Albertans are giving Prime Minister Carney a very clear signal, and I think they're giving Danielle Smith a very clear signal in of what they want. Albertans are saying, look, we're not perfectly happy. There are serious issues to be addressed. We don't understand perhaps transfer payments, but even if we completely understood them, we don't think that it's a perfect system. Some adjustments need to be made.
Mhm.
But overall, they're saying, look, we're sticking with Canada. we have 5,000 volunteers right now taking their time to collect signatures. Once we collect the 300,000 signatures, this will be the biggest petition in the history of this country. So the message will be clear. It is not a signature for status quo, but it is a signature that we love this country. We know it's one of the most functioning countries in the world, believe it or not, one of the most functioning democracies in the world. We're seeing democracies and democratic institutions crumbling all around us. Just look south of the border. And this is something worth preserving. Now, yes, there are dysfunctional relationships between provinces, and they always have been since the inception of Canada. But we're willing to negotiate. What I'm seeing is something analogous to a family. If you have a family with 10 in Alberta, with Canada, with 13 kids, because we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, not everybody is always happy. Somebody always gets the bottom bunk bed, and you wish you had the one on top. But that doesn't mean you pack your bags and you move out of the house. You try to negotiate with your brothers and sisters. You trade something for something. Maybe you will get the top bunk bed one day, but just simply packing it is not the answer. And this is what Canada is all about. We often ask ourselves, what is Canada? Canada is one of the most successful countries in the world because of the fact that it always negotiates, and we have very good processes for negotiation, and we trust those processes.
Yeah,
And at the end of the
I
day,
might push back. I think in the last 10 years, I do think that we are starting to see a pretty strong demise of Canada and the spending and um, that part kind of doesn't sit well with me, because I just feel that we are on this pathway to failure very, very quickly if we keep going the way that we're going, the way that
do
we're
you feel
spending.
it? Do you feel it, or do you know it?
Well, you just look at the national debt, right? And
Okay,
the
so
way the
which
debt's
prime
going.
minister in the last 20 years racked up the most debt?
I don't know. I feel like you're setting me up, so I'm going to say Harper.
Ha- And I think he was a great prime minister.
Yeah.
I was a deputy premier when he was prime minister. We had a great working relationship, but we also agreed to disagree on a lot of things
Yeah.
because as Albertans we were just as unhappy. Remember Prime Minister Harper, when he ran for office first, he promised us a triple E Senate, which was supposed to address most of what we are talking about today: equal and elected and effective Senate that would give us more voice in Canada. That never happened because Prime Minister Harper quickly realized that opening up the Constitution would maybe get us that, but we may end up losing a whole bunch of other things. So he chose to stay away from it. So I know that Prime Minister Trudeau, judging by the bumper stickers and the flags, was not the most liked Prime Minister in Alberta. But the fact is, when you actually look at the numbers, Prime Minister Harper wasn't much more effective in addressing those issues either, and nor was Martin, and nor was Chrétien, and Pierre Trudeau, because these are complex issues. So what we are doing is we continue sort of negotiating them in small increments, but no prime minister has ever yet, fully addressed Alberta's problems, because if he or she were to do that, they would also have to address other provinces' problems, which would create Alberta new problems.
Sure,
So,
for sure.
so
No,
a
fair
lot of
enough.
so a lot of prime ministers are sort of just sort of riding the wave, because these issues are very complex. But having said that, I want it to be perfectly clear: what we are doing is not an endorsement of status quo. And as a matter of fact, I am hoping to have a conversation with our prime minister and telling him that do not take the solace in the fact that 300,000 Albertans signed a petition and they said they're happy. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that, as always, we expect you, Mr. Prime Minister, to address some of our grievances and our issues, but it doesn't mean we're leaving Canada. As a matter of fact, we want to be at that table and negotiate that.
Hmm. Do you think sometimes we might be like, and I'm just throwing this out there, that we might be overthinking this, like as Albertans, and I do believe and I've said this on my podcast before, I believe Daniel Smith had it right, that at the end of the day, when it looked like the transfer payments and all those things were, when Alberta was booming and work was going and they couldn't get enough workers and the oil and gas was happening, we didn't really care about the transfer payments. We were making good money. We were paying our bills, putting money away, and some people buying those big $150,000 boats, right? Those days are certainly gone in some regards. But when Quebec made that proclamation that we're not going to let this pipeline go through to enhance the prosperity of Canada as a nation, that's when, for whatever percentage it is, whether it's 10% or whatever, kind of got a little ticked off, because we're like, here's Quebec receiving all this billions of dollars every year. Those billions of dollars every year are going out of Alberta, and now they're blocking prosperity from not just Alberta, but prosperity for the entire nation. And I think that's where the tide kind of turned. And if we had a prime minister, if we had leadership that says we want to stand up for unity in this country, when we want to all wave that Canadian flag, even though it may mean different things to each of us right across this nation, that there's a pride in there, and it's because we are one. But we're not one right now.
Yeah, but the equalization formula we have right now is the one designed by Prime Minister Harper. Prime Minister Trudeau simply extended, without any amendments, this equalization formula. So is it perfect? No, I think there are issues within the equalization formula. But even if those issues were fixed, we still would be paying into equalization. Although, most Albertans don't know that, but we actually were a have-not province very recently. We also collect from this equalization formula when the price of oil goes down.
Mm-hmm.
So we benefit from it when it's reversed. But that is not the problem. First of all, I think we should do a better job, all of us, sharing with all Canadians how this formula works. It's such a complex beast. And I've been in politics for so long, and I even have a hard time wrapping my head around it. But the best analogy is a property tax. The bigger house you have, the more property tax you pay. You still get taxed at the same percentage. Every province gets taxed at the same percentage, because equalization formula is income tax, personal and corporate income tax. And since Alberta's average weekly earnings, both personal and corporate, are higher during oil booms than anywhere else in Canada, we end up paying more. But the percentage is the same, right? And then that money is distributed through a very complex formula across. Now, Quebec is an interesting study because, yes, they more often than Alberta, receive from the equalization formula, but they are also the highest taxed province in Canada. Income tax and property taxes and their GST combined with PST is by far higher than Alberta. So I don't know if any Albertan would actually want to live in Quebec based on that. One of our biggest problems that we have in Alberta, and Premier Lougheed was the one to realize it, and we've always said that, but no government, including my own, have ever done anything about it, is that we are still very highly dependent on single industry, oil and gas, and the royalties from it. And things are great. It's sort of almost like being addicted to gambling. When you're winning in a casino, things are great, but when you're not, they're not so great. And we have these massive busts and booms, and it's next to impossible to run a government on unpredictable income, because you have no idea whether you can announce 10 school constructions or 30, not knowing what your income will be next year. So stabilizing that would be important. Now imagine if Alberta was a separate country, because now we have this equalization formula. We forget about healthcare transfers, which we receive every year, and there are many other transfers that we receive. Now imagine running a country that is only based on oil and gas revenue. How difficult it would be without having any equalization formulas and other provinces kicking in when it is needed. It wouldn't be a joyride to manage Alberta as a separate country because of the volatility of our economy. But that's what happens in resource-based economies, and that's why you need to have this national diversity and be able to share in good times and receive in bad times. Thankfully, we have more good times than bad times. You know, it's sort of ironic because we almost should be happy that we're paying, because that means we're having good times and we get to buy those $250,000 trucks and boats. Uh, and that's when we're sharing, because during times when we're not paying into equalization formula, those are not good times for Alberta. But as I said earlier, I think that formula itself can be improved. I don't think it is equitable, and there are some adjustments that need to be made for Quebec, but ultimately it wouldn't in any meaningful way change things. Now, if we want to be left to our own devices and eat when times are good and starve when times are bad and have no support from any other jurisdictions in Canada, I guess it's a chance that some may want to take. But this report that Separatists issued, that year one there would be zero income tax. Well, during years that oil is, at 100 and some dollars a barrel, maybe, assuming that we don't assume any debt or any other liabilities from Canada. But what would happen when dollar drops to 30 some dollars a barrel? As we know, it often does.
Sure.
Would this new government of this Republic of Alberta all of a sudden be instituting income taxes? I don't think so.
Yeah, no, you guys have certainly given me a lot to think about, and I do. I respect what you guys are doing. I see the passion that you guys have for Canada and also Alberta. And it is, we want to try to unify things. We don't want to be separate. And there's obviously questions that do pop around if Alberta just leaves and we don't have access to Tidewater while we're basically at the mercy of the United States, right? And that is no position to be in.
And imagine what Trump must be thinking. Now, our oil has access to Tidewater, and will have more access to Tidewater. I have confidence in that. That we're hearing from other provinces is starting to soften and change. Now, if you're President Trump and you have this little tiny country next door, rich in oil and gas, that has no access to other markets, what do? We are already selling oil to the United States at a discounted price, but we have access to other markets. Now, imagine if we had no access to other markets, what would the United States do to us? They could buy oil at 5 cents on a dollar if they want, because they're the only market you have.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You guys, I do. Like I said, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you keeping the conversation going. I see the passion that you have. And we're in very interesting times. And it feels like the world temperature is no longer just at a simmer, that we're starting to get to that boiling point where it just seems like things can go either way very, very quickly. And to have
it's very emotional, and
it is very
and
emotional.
it's so charged. I can tell you that this conversation on both sides, there's passion on both sides, and it is incredibly emotional. And I have to say, even on social media, I mean, the conversations are very heated, and we see the passion, good and bad, but it is supercharged. And I think it speaks to the tension that we're seeing geopolitically, for sure. It's like we're in a pressure cooker.
This is no time to play with matches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. We need stability, certainly.
Yeah. You guys, thank
So
you.
where do I send you that petition? I think you want to sign the petition.
Well, I'm sure they'll be set up at the dog park here this weekend, so I'll go have a conversation.
So do you think you will sign it?
Full disclosure, probably not yet. Not yet. I need some time to think about it, because
So tell me, what do you need? I really would love to hear from you. What would you need to say, I want to stay in this country?
I think I kind of touched on it before. I think we need a fair share with all the other provinces. I think I always come back to Quebec a little bit. We'll pick on Quebec right now. When they decided to block that Energy East pipeline and block prosperity from that kind of ticked me off, kind of ticked a lot of Albertans off, right? And it's just, it would just be nice if someone would say, okay, Quebec, you block this prosperity from Canada, so we have to pull some money back in those transfer payments from you. They're receiving, but they're not really willing to work with the rest of the country. And, you know, parts of BC is that way. And it's just, if we're working towards, I wish that somebody would sell what kind of revenue Quebec would receive and is receiving already from Alberta, as opposed to just trying to block it. I bet you if the Quebecers were able to vote on whether the Energy East pipeline came through, I bet you they would vote it through. If they were sold as to what this means for Canada as a whole and Quebec, I think they would have voted it through. I think the politicians get in the way of a lot of different things.
And I am no longer convinced that Quebec is as vigorous in opposing this anymore. I see a much softened position, and not because of transfer payments. They were taking a principled position. You know, as much as we hate to disagree with them, you know, one thing you have to give them is that they're taking a very principled position, and they're paying through their nose for that principled position, because their taxes, as I said earlier, are the highest by far in Canada. And they're doing that, but I'm seeing a softening of that position, without a doubt. The problem we have is that, how do you ever engage in a dialogue? How do when we're threatening each other with separation? That is not a way to start a dialogue. So what I would rather do is to put the separation issue away, and I hope that I think Quebec sort of effectively already has, and then we can sit at the same table and have this conversation.
Yeah, I feel that it's the separation issue and the possibility of Alberta. You know, the phrase is a sovereign Alberta in Canada. I know we touched on that before, but inside of that sovereignty could give Alberta the tools it needs to negotiate a better deal for itself inside of Canada.
But you do see the oxymoron, right? Being
I
sovereign
do,
inside
for
of Canada.
sure. But that's what they're talking about, so that we can have the cards.
Well, you can talk about it, but that's like saying, you know, I get to live in your house, but by my rules. It just sort of doesn't work that way. You know, we have a constitution, and it is a negotiated document. It's a living document. We continuously renegotiate it, and courts redefine it as well. But you know, when you just sit down for 1 minute and you look actually at the definition of the words sovereign within United Canada. Well, you can't be sovereign within United Canada. You're either sovereign or you're not. But you know what Danielle is implying to separatists is that you sort of get to make the rules you like, and then she's saying to those who aren't separatists, saying, yeah, but we will be in United Canada. We'll be strong member in Canada. This is obviously not a starter. It's a good political thing, and good for Danielle if it's working for her. I'm not sure how well it is working for her.
If we back it up quite a few years to when Quebec was wanting to separate, it was kind of similar. It was like, yeah, we're going to leave Canada, but we're still going to use your currency. We're still going to provide you with all the dairy. You know, so it was, yeah, they were basically proposing what you said.
What did we do? We showed them the middle finger as the rest of Canada. We said, no, if you're leaving, you're leaving. This is a divorce. You know, this is you don't divorce and then say, honey, but I'm gonna show up every so often.
Yeah, fair enough. You guys, I appreciate you guys. I really do. I appreciate your heart, and I appreciate your passion, and I appreciate the discourse. And I think that's the heart behind this podcast as well, is to have engaging conversation, to talk and to have conversations that we don't necessarily agree on. But you know what? Here's what I'll give you. I will continue to listen, to go onto your website to see if there's any new information there, and continue to grow where my thinking's at as well. Because yeah, like I said, I used to love Canada, and I could do it again. I could come back to that point where I'm like a passionate Canadian, but I just feel that the rest of Canada is kind of giving us the middle finger out here a little bit. But I will listen to this podcast a few times, because I know you guys have said a lot in this podcast, and I look forward to listening to it again.
But you know, the beauty of Canada is this. And that's what makes us outstanding. Other than most of the world really wants to live in Canada. Immigrants have choices where they go, and most of them apply for Canada. Why? Because they know it's a damn good place. But we give each other a middle finger. But when there is drought in Alberta, Saskatchewan farmers are instantly here giving, donating hay. When there is fires in British Columbia, Alberta firefighters are the first ones to be over there. When there is ice storms in Quebec, ATCO and Alberta electricians and others are the first ones to be in Quebec and fix the power lines. That's what Canada is all about. As I said, it's like a family. We squabble and we fight and we take each other behind the shed once in a while, but at the end of the day, we're a family. And and like any other family, we like to look good on the outside, but all families are somewhat dysfunctional, and that's exactly the beauty of Canada.
Well, I think you're talking about Canadian values, right? The principles of being neighborly and kind. And I, for one, would really like this issue to be put to bed. Honestly, this conversation with separatism has been it is supercharged. Like I said, I don't want to
Yeah.
get into it, but it is somewhat personal for people. And on social media, we're getting hits, and it's very, very hard. And beyond all of that, I really want to get back to a point of kind and civil discourse. And you and I can disagree, Carlin, right? But we don't have to,
Yeah.
throw mud at each other. And I really
No.
appreciate this conversation.
No,
And
and honestly,
I
when I walk past those people at the tables, I have so much respect for them, and I do wish I'm saying this honestly. I wish I could have the passion for Canada.
Well,
Yeah.
this probably is a topic for another time. I've had a metamorphosis about being Canadian myself as an Asian Canadian and the daughter of an immigrant family. So Asian Canadians have a very different relationship with Canada, and I've had to come to terms with, some of the racist policies. Sorry, you'll hear my phone ringing here, and had to reconcile a lot of that, right? And having had that kind of metamorphosis on my own, I'm really passionate that this imperfect country gave my family a chance, an opportunity for someone like me to get an
Absolutely.
education and to do really well. And are we evolving as a country? Yes. Can we do better? Absolutely. And I just want to leave with your viewers or your listeners with that call to action to just return to really polite political discourse. I care about you, and if you don't agree with me, that's okay. But we don't have to be, taking shots at each other.
No, I know. And that's, social media has just kind of opened that door a little bit where it's easy to sit behind, a keyboard and computer and just fire away and be rude. And that's not who we are as Canadians, right? Like let's keep the conversation going. Let's chat about it. And I really do. Serena, I know you got to run. So you guys, I appreciate you. Who knows? Maybe we'll have you back on again.
Awesome.
Maybe I'll be a convert down the road.
Thank
And
you,
if
Carla.
you just DM us personally, because we'll make sure the petition comes your way.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys.
Nice to
Take
meet you.
care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.